Welcome to the N1 Fitness Podcast. I'm your host as always, Marcus Sadu, and today we've got an Ask Me Anything episode. So just a quick reminder for folks sending questions in, these don't have to be nutrition, fitness, or health-related questions necessarily. Feel free to ask me anything. I'm happy to answer personal questions as well, just because I think it's more interesting than the protein, carbs, and fat stuff all the time. But anywho, let's dig in here. I'm hoping we can get to all the questions because there are quite a few. So let's go. First up, what and how are you eating while traveling? So for those of you who don't follow me on social media, I've been on the road traveling in California and Mexico for the last 2.5 months. So my nutrition has been slightly different simply because here in Mexico especially, I don't have access to all the same foods that I do in Vancouver. So I've been staying mostly in hostels as well as some Airbnbs and then a few friends' homes along the way. And I've still managed to cook, I'd say 90% of my meals myself. It's obviously easier when I'm staying at an Airbnb because I have a kitchen to myself, but in a hostel, I'm sharing with, like a million folks, and the kitchens usually aren't super well equipped, but I make it work because it's a priority for me. So as usual, I'm eating 2 meals per day, and lately my first meal is typically something with whole eggs, and oatmeal and fruit, most likely, or some white rice with a protein source and then a bunch of vegetables with that. So I might have some fruit in between meal 1 and 2, like a banana or an apple. And then in meal 2, something high fiber. So I found a super high fiber whole wheat pasta that I've been cooking up with a protein source of some sort, maybe chicken or fish, and then throwing a bunch of veggies in there with some tomato sauce that's just tomatoes and salt. Now, there was a brief period of time when I got to Mexico that I was eating one home-cooked meal and then going out for tacos at night. But after about 4 to 5 days, I noticed that I just didn't feel as good as I do when I'm prepping my own meals. So I got back into cooking the vast majority of them myself and definitely having tacos because they're delicious, just not nearly as often. Now, a side note here, I've talked to a lot of other travelers, and I think there's a misconception that eating out is cheaper than cooking yourself, especially in places like Mexico, but in my opinion, it's not, plain and simple. So eating out is cheaper in Mexico than it is in Vancouver, where I'm from, for example. However, cooking on your own is more affordable in both places. And we're not even talking about how much healthier it is to make your own food. It's just a lot more affordable as well to cook your own meals. It's more work, obviously, but just thought I'd throw that in there. Next question. Have you taken anything positive away from getting as heavy as you did? This is a really good question. And the answer is undoubtedly yes. So in my before picture on the homepage of my website, I was at 210 pounds. And in the after photo, I was in the mid to high 150s. So there's about a 55-pound difference between the two pics. Now, when I was 210, I felt like shit. I wasn't happy with the way I looked. My digestion was off. My skin wasn't where I wanted it to be, and the list goes on. You might be saying, well, what the fuck is positive about that? Now that I work with my clients to achieve weight loss and weave in their movement, sleep, stress management, lifestyle habits, all that good stuff, and from my own personal experience, I can really identify with where they're at and what they're experiencing. So I've actually been there myself. I'm not someone who's been in shape and lean my entire life. And I think that actually gives me a massive advantage as a coach, both experientially and then also being that my clients can actually see my transformation, know that I've been through the same process, and that it's absolutely possible to achieve. So it's sort of like a coach that was never a player themselves. They may be a great coach, but the coach that has the same abilities but also played the game and got experience by being in the trenches has an understanding that the other coach just doesn't have. And also, when the coach that actually played the game speaks from experience, their words tend to hold more weight than the other coach, in my opinion, because the players know that they've been there themselves and know what they're going through. So their words can actually be more effective from a coaching standpoint. So in short, the answer is I've taken tons. This could probably be a whole podcast on its own, but I've taken so much from my own weight loss experience for myself, but where I find it most valuable is around how I can help and support my clients to achieve their goals. So tons of positive takeaways from my weight loss journey. What's the best position to sleep in? The best position to sleep in is the one that you get the best sleep in. So this is super straightforward. Some folks may say, well, it's bad to sleep on your back. Others say don't sleep on your side or your stomach, especially if you're pregnant. The truth is the loads are so low that it doesn't matter. When I say loads, I mean your body weight. So if you were to sleep with a 100-pound sandbag on your back, that would be a different story. But the loads of your own body are so low while you sleep that the best position to sleep in my opinion, is the one where you get the best quality sleep and wake up feeling rested and alert all day. Next question. Is it better to work out on an empty stomach rather than having a small meal prior to a workout? I'm wondering if you burn more fat not eating versus having a meal beforehand. This answer is going to depend on your goals. So for example, if maximum muscle gain is your goal and you work out first thing in the morning, then eating beforehand is probably a good idea because you've been fasting all night. So you'd want to get some protein in before you train in order to stimulate protein synthesis. If your primary goal is health, then just go with your preference or whatever makes you feel better. Personally, I like to work out on an empty stomach because I train in the morning and I don't eat breakfast. Occasionally, I'd have a banana beforehand, but only if I feel like I really need it. As far as whether you burn more fat if you don't eat versus if you do, it doesn't matter. So I'll explain why. When you go into a workout fasted or not having eaten, you use more fat for energy because that's the substrate that's most readily available. And substrate is just a fancy word of saying energy. So when we go into a workout fed or having eaten, we use less fat and most likely more carbohydrates, glucose or glycogen for energy. Glycogen is just the word for stored carbohydrate in the muscle. Now, by the sounds of it, you might be thinking, well, I want to use fat while I work out. But in this case, it just means that you're using more fat for energy during your workout. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to burn more fat over the course of the day. So in short, you're not going to burn more fat if you don't eat in the morning, assuming all other things are equal, like total calorie intake for the day. So first look at what your goal is, as well as what makes you feel best while you train, and make a decision whether to eat before your workout or not from that place. Next up, I've been hitting the gym regularly and have gotten a lot stronger, but now I'm looking to cut some fat. Any foods or workouts you would suggest? Okay, cool. So that's great that you've got the consistency piece down and your strength is improved. As far as any foods or workouts I'd suggest to lose fat, we need to look at principles first and foremost. So in order to lose fat, we need to be in a caloric deficit. The easiest way to sustain and maintain a caloric deficit is by eating primarily whole foods because they're going to keep you nice and full. Not to mention they're also the most nutrient dense and therefore healthful foods. And then workout wise, you're going to want to maintain your strength. I'm assuming while you lose fat, so you're going to need to continue to lift weights and most likely increase your volume slightly as you get deeper into your diet because being in a caloric deficit is inherently catabolic. Now, catabolic just means breaking down while anabolic means building up. So a calorie surplus or eating above your maintenance level of calories is anabolic, and eating below your maintenance level is by definition catabolic. So being that a calorie deficit is catabolic, we actually need slightly more volume, training volume, in a calorie deficit to send the signals to the body to maintain the muscle and strength that we have. If you're a beginner trainee, don't even bother with this volume part. Just keep training as you are, and you're going to maintain and probably even make more gains while in a deficit. But if you're intermediate or advanced, then playing with your training volume is most likely going to be necessary. So there are not specific fat loss foods or workouts that I'd suggest. You just need to focus on the principles. So being in a calorie deficit for fat loss and continue to train like you are, or with slightly higher volume to maintain your muscle mass and strength levels if you're more on the intermediate or advanced end of things. What are your thoughts on liquid breakfasts like egg whites mixed with milk and Nesquik? Okay, so I'm not crazy about liquid meals if your goal is fat loss, because they aren't necessarily as satiating as whole food meals. Also, something like Nesquik just isn't a great food option health-wise. Now, if your goal is to gain weight, then a liquid breakfast might be the best way to go for the exact reasons that it isn't a great option for fat loss. It's probably not going to keep you super full for long, and it's a super quick and easy way to get calories in. So if your goal is fat loss, I wouldn't recommend liquid meals, but if your goal is weight gain, or you're in a calorie surplus to put on muscle, for example, you might want to utilize liquid meals in order to get more calories in. How do I get rid of the flab on the back of my arms, aka wings? So there's some research showing some correlation between fat distribution and the hormonal environment of the person. But this isn't my area of expertise, so maybe I'll look at getting someone on the podcast to chat about that specifically. There's also genetic components at play here as far as how body fat is distributed. The most important thing to get rid of your quote-unquote wings is going to be a calorie deficit, because that's how you lose fat. And if you've got fat on the back of your arms that you'd like gone, that's the way to do it. Also, weight training is a good idea because that's going to impact your body in a beneficial way hormonally and also just give you a better look visually. Now, we all have stubborn areas on our bodies when it comes to fat loss, or essentially areas that we lose fat first and areas that we lose fat last. Typically, fat loss starts in the chin and cheeks and works its way down. A standard male body fat distribution pattern is more of an apple shape, while women tend to favor more of a pear shape, but obviously there are exceptions to that. The most dangerous or high risk to your health body fat distribution pattern is actually the typical male one, so the apple shape. You don't want a bunch of fat hanging around your internal organs and belly. That's the most harmful stuff. So women have it much better when it comes to body fat distribution and health. And the women listening right now might be thinking, well, I don't like the way it looks, and fair enough. However, from a health standpoint, it's actually more favorable than the typical male fat holding pattern. How do you get your clients? So I get asked this question a lot. The primary way that I get my clients is through referrals. My clients are super generous about recommending me to their friends and family, so word of mouth is the primary way. I also get clients through my website, my email list, which you can actually sign up for through my website if you're interested. Social media stuff like Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, folks find me through as well. This podcast, obviously. It's usually other trainers that ask me this question. So my best advice to trainers and folks that want to coach people with their nutritional habits, or just want to be a personal trainer, essentially just be in this industry and get more clients, is without question to invest time in learning more. So I spend 500 plus hours a year learning outside of my regular business hours. So that's 500 hours on top of doing my regular client check-ins, social media posts, writing articles, doing the podcast, etc. And that has me always progressing, learning more, and becoming a better coach. So I've heard some people use the phrase learn more to earn more, and I think for the most part that's true. Getting better at what you do is going to attract more people to want to work with you. And getting better at what you do is going to have you get better results with your clients. So, the algorithm works. How can I motivate myself to be more active? First of all, with this question, we need to touch on our human nature. So we evolved in a food scarce environment where the biggest threat to our survival was not having enough calories or food around to sustain us. So starvation was first and foremost the biggest worry. Now, we have evolutionary mechanisms in place to have us want to eat more and move less because of this primary threat to our survival. So there's something called the optimal foraging theory or optimal foraging strategy that I talked about with Stefan Guillenet in episode number 5 of the podcast, which I'd highly recommend if you want to learn more about our evolutionary makeup and what mechanisms have us overeat and why. The equation is simply, how can I get the most calories while expending or burning the least amount of calories in the shortest amount of time possible? So you can think about it like a business. A business wants to get the most profits with the lowest expenses in the quickest amount of time. So all animals have this optimal foraging strategy, quote unquote, built into them as a survival mechanism, and it's been essential to our survival as humans for thousands, if not millions of years. But the thing is, with agricultural revolution, our food environment has changed. And so we now have an abundance of food available, but our evolutionary wiring is still the same. We are wired for a food scarce environment because organisms just don't evolve that quickly. Evolution takes a lot of time. And so you might be asking, why am I talking about this? Why am I going into this much detail? It's super helpful to know that we're inherently not necessarily going to be all that motivated to exercise or to be more active due to these evolutionary traits. So if food is scarce, you don't want to be burning a bunch of energy for no reason. So having laid that groundwork, now what? We can't do anything to change our evolutionary tendencies, but it helps to know about them because it doesn't mean that you're inherently lazy and your friend that exercises isn't a lazy piece of shit like you. It's just human nature. So what should we do about it moving forward? The answer is to find some sort of movement that you enjoy. So it could be gardening, it could be walking, hiking, riding your bike, playing a sport, hitting the gym, if that's your preference, dancing, fucking Zumba, it doesn't matter. The most important thing is that you enjoy your given activity of choice, because having fun with your physical activity is sustainable long term. And if you hate it, you're just not going to maintain it, plain and simple. Why am I hungry at the same times every day? Our hunger is circadian rhythm based. So circa meaning about and dia meaning day, so about a day. Because our hunger runs off of a circadian rhythm, we get hungry at the times in which we eat. So if you wake up at, say, 7 a.m. and eat right around 7:30 every day, your body comes to expect that, and therefore you get hungry at that time each day. Enzymes even start to be activated and released. Appetite is stimulated. Thoughts of food are flowing through your brain and all that good stuff leading up to that time. So if your lunch is right around noon, you get hungry right around noon. Super simple and straightforward stuff. Your body is an adaptation machine. It's incredible. So now if you're wanting to change your meal timing, because your schedule has changed or you want to implement something like intermittent fasting, for example, I would recommend gradually shifting your meal pattern around. So how would this look? For example, if you're phasing out breakfast, start to push your first meal back by, say, 30 to 60 minutes for a week, and then by an additional 30 to 60 minutes the next week, and so on. You might actually be able to do this faster because hunger tends to come in waves, meaning you feel hungry for, say, 20-ish minutes, and then if you push past that initial wave, you may not feel hungry again for a couple hours. It's going to depend on the person, but this is how I'd recommend changing your meal frequency or cadence. But the specific answer to your question is that circadian rhythm is why we're hungry at the same times each day. Do you eat any superfoods? Now, I don't believe in the concept of superfoods personally. There are more or less nutrient-dense foods, but the term superfoods is largely just a marketing term to get folks to buy super expensive, overly hyped products like acai berries and spirulina and shit like that. So there's nothing wrong with these foods. They're totally fine to integrate into your diet if you'd like to. However, there's nothing inherently special or super about them either. So personally, I just focus on single to minimal ingredient whole foods that I cook myself. Can you recommend any exercises to tone, firm, and lift my butt? So first of all, we're going to want to look at fat loss here because toning is just another word for fat loss. So a calorie deficit is necessary to drop fat, and secondarily, you're going to want to build your butt via things like squats, lunges, hip thrusts, etc. And also, I think sprinting is actually a super underrated way to build strong-looking glutes. So lose fat in general, and your butt should get leaner, and that'll quote-unquote lift and tone it, and then build your ass via resistance exercise, and you should be well on your way to a bubble butt. Now, I will say, I see this phenomenon all the time with both men and women. It just happens to be with different areas of their bodies. So women lose fat and they say, I've completely lost my ass. And then men lose fat and they say, I've lost so much size in my chest and arms and shoulders. And the truth is, there probably wasn't much, if any, muscle loss, assuming you stayed on top of your resistance training during your deficit. It was probably just body fat in those areas to begin with that you thought was muscle. Getting leaner is the quickest way to see how much muscle you actually have. And I'd say 9 times out of 10, it's a lot less than you think. I remember when I got really lean for the first time, I was like, fuck, I am a skinny bitch. And it was true. But I had never been that lean before. So I'd been mistaking some of the fat on my body for muscle. And we carry fat everywhere, guys. It's on our faces, necks, chest, back, hips, butts, quads, hammies. It's distributed everywhere. So just keep that in mind. What is the best shoe for the gym? So it's going to depend on what sort of training you're going to be doing in the gym. So the ideal shoe for CrossFit is going to be a lot different than the ideal shoe for something like Olympic weightlifting, for example. If you're going to be strictly lifting weights, I think that a flat shoe is a great option. So something like Converse, so Chucks are a great way to go. Personally, I train in basically a flat shoe, but they're super breathable and light. I find the Chucks a little heavy for myself personally. The shoe I use is called the AP Mercury Light Knit. It's by Native, which unfortunately I don't think that they carry anymore. They have a 2.0 version, but I like the look of the originals better. The reason I like for people to train in a flat shoe or as close to a flat shoe as possible is because wearing a heeled shoe shortens the calf, hamstrings, and then up the line you go. So think about it like wearing a miniature heel all the time. Now, for Olympic weightlifters, this is advantageous because it helps them get into more depth with more ease. However, the average person, I think it's beneficial to wear something as close to flat as possible virtually all the time. I look at heeled shoes, specifically women's, proper heels like dessert. You don't want to have dessert every day. You don't want to be wearing those things every day, but here and there they're okay. So lastly, actually, when you don't need to be wearing shoes, don't. When you're at home lounging, don't wear slippers or slides, just go barefoot. You can even go actually shoeless in the gym if you'd like. Lots of lifters choose to do that as well. What are your thoughts on the best protein supplements for women? I'd prefer a more natural approach if possible. The first thing to note here is that a protein supplement recommendation wouldn't be any different for a man and a woman. And then secondly, if you want to take the more quote unquote natural approach, I'm doing air quotes right now, it doesn't get any more natural than eating whole food and skipping something like a shake or a bar altogether, because it's a processed product. But if you want the most natural type of protein that isn't whole food, you could go for something like a whey protein that's sweetened with stevia as opposed to sucralose or aspartame. If you're sensitive to dairy, then a whey protein isolate may work, or you could go with a vegetarian or vegan option of protein. And then again, pick one that's sweetened with stevia. If you haven't had stevia, it does seem to be somewhat of an acquired taste. I've found that a lot of my clients just don't like it. Personally, I do, but the majority of folks seem to be not too crazy about the stuff. So just a heads up, you might want to try a sample packet of the protein before buying a whole tub, just in case you don't like the stevia taste. Oh, and then I almost forgot, you can get an unflavored and unsweetened protein powder nowadays as well. So there's a company called Whey Protein. I think they're out of the UK, I believe, but they have North American distribution as well, that offers products like this, and they literally just contain the protein powder and soy lecithin. Lecithin or whatever, I don't even know how to say that word. Anyways, that soy whatever is just an emulsifier which stabilizes the product. So that's an option too. I don't have any association with the company, by the way, but they're pretty popular. Why do you like a lower carb breakfast and a higher carb dinner? Now, to give you some context, a client of mine asked this question because I had her program set up where her breakfast was lower in carbs and her lunch and dinner were higher in carbs. And in some circles, that no carbs after 6 p.m. stuff is still floating around. So it prompted this question. Now, the primary reason is adherence. The simplest way to think about it is to ask yourself, are you more likely to go off track with your nutritional habits first thing in the morning or at night while you're watching Netflix? For most people, it's going to be harder to stay on track at nighttime because from a social standpoint, that's just the way our eating patterns are structured. So I like to make dinner a fairly calorie-dense, high food volume meal, which is going to leave my clients feeling more full and satiated when they're more likely to potentially get off track. It makes sense, right? Now, someone might say, well, insulin sensitivity is peaked first thing in the morning or right after a workout, so shouldn't they be having their highest carb meals then? In an ideal world, yeah, maybe, but the overall difference we're talking about is maybe 1%. That could be generous. And the overall adherence benefit from sticking to a calorie deficit, if your goal is fat loss, as far as results go, is literally the most important thing when it comes to fat loss. So we've got to look at this stuff objectively and prioritize. Also, a lot of folks just feel really good having a higher protein, lower carb breakfast as far as mental clarity and alertness go versus having a big ass meal for breakfast first thing in the morning and then feeling a little lethargic and their day is just starting. So not all folks are like this, but plenty are. And then lastly, I mean, if a client wants to have a higher carb breakfast and they can stick to the program that way and they like that, then by all means, I set it up accordingly. I've just found after working with hundreds of folks that the vast majority of them do better with a lower carb breakfast and a higher carb dinner from an adherence standpoint. Do you always eat healthy? Of course not. No one does. It's impossible to eat healthy 100% of the time. I think that folks in the fitness field are sometimes perceived like they only eat the most healthful foods at all time, but that's just not the case. I mean, I make an effort to post different sorts of meals on social media as well when I'm having a few beers because I want you guys to see that this stuff can fit into a healthful eating strategy and you can still get results. You don't need to be perfect, nor is it possible or sustainable long term. So to give you an example, actually yesterday, I had eggs and oatmeal with fruit for my first meal, and then my second meal was like white rice or that whole wheat pasta I alluded to earlier with a lean protein source, and then a whole bunch of vegetables for dinner. After that, I had some cereal as a little treat because I fucking love cereal and it fit within my daily caloric allotment. Now, I don't eat cereal or treats every day, but I'll indulge maybe a few times per week-ish, depending on my current goals. So no, I don't eat healthfully. Nobody eats healthfully 100% of the time. What's your favorite supplement, and are supplements a waste of money? Personally, I'm not taking any supplements right now. I do my best to get as much nutrient density as I can via single to minimal ingredient whole foods. One thing I have contemplated supplementing with, just because I've been in Mexico for the last month and a half, is some omega-3s, because I haven't had access to any salmon or fatty fish. But back home in Vancouver, we have amazing seafood, so I'd be eating salmon probably 2 times per week, maybe even more, because one of my favorite foods is sushi, and that would more than cover my omega-3 bases. As far as supplements being a waste of money, some of them absolutely are. Most of them absolutely are. I should probably put a podcast together on which supplements actually work and which ones are a waste of time and money. Let me know if you'd find that useful, actually. But here's how I look at supplements. By definition, they are supplementary. So if someone is talking about this pre-workout supplement this and this antioxidant superfood supplement that, and they don't have their overall nutrition, sleep, movement, and stress management dialed into a T, they are missing the forest for the trees. And truth be told, I was that guy for years. I was researching supplements like crazy back in the day and spending ridiculous amounts of money on these things. And my results were subpar at best because my priorities were completely out of whack. Once I started focusing on what matters most, which is, like I mentioned, nutrition, sleep, movement, stress management, I got the results I was looking for. Tons of wasted time, but hey, spilled milk at this point. I learned some stuff, and I just kind of laugh at my younger self. Such a dumbass. Oh, man. That is going to be it for this AMA episode. I hope you guys took something away from that. If you want your questions answered on a future episode, send them my way and I will add them to the list. And thanks so much for listening, guys. I'll catch you guys on the next episode. Adios.